Welcome to Beyond the Shelf with OPL. My name is Dawn.
And I'm Jenny.
And we're super excited yet again. We're always super excited. It's just an eternal state when you work at the library.
People might think that that is an oxymoron, but it's so true. I love working at the library. It's not boring at all. It's wonderful. I'm excited today because today we're going to discuss all things YA, which is really Dawn's fieldhouse, and she is going to take up all of the time, and that's okay because she has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to teens and everything teen related and YA, which also incidentally stands for young adult, in case you did not know that. But the fun thing about Dawn is if you haven't met her in person, you would think she was a teenager. She still gets, looks like, how did you get a job when you're only 12 years old? So it's a lot of fun.
Okay, I don't look 12. I do look significantly younger than I am, which has its pros and cons, for sure. So, yeah, YA, it does mean young adult, like Jenny said, but it doesn't mean that these books, this section is only for teens or young adults. I think YA is for everyone.
I agree. Up to a certain age. I mean, YA does sometimes it gets a little graphic in certain areas, so you don't want like your 4-year-old reading YA or your 8-year-old even. I mean, it really is subjective and it depends on the maturity level of your child. But YA is definitely not just for teenagers. I am well beyond teenager status and I love YA books. I made a whole list of authors and books that I have enjoyed for several years.
I absolutely did not make a list of YA that I've enjoyed because and that would be very long. So I did not make a list. And obviously, when I say YA is for everyone, obviously there are age limits because the criteria, it is made to be relatable for teenagers and middle schoolers. And there's just things that small children can't relate to. They can relate to having siblings, but maybe not, the middle school experience. So there is that too to keep in mind. So Jenny, can I tell you about all the different stuff that we have in our YA section?
I would love to hear it.
You would love to hear it. Awesome. The young adult section at Orville Public Library has a gloriously painted pony statue. It is the crowning glory of the YA section. It was painted by some Orville junior high schoolers many moons ago. We'll say that. I don't know why. But we have fiction, obviously, and that makes up most of the collection. There's nonfiction. There's also a large collection of graphic novels for fans of graphic novels, and I would like to interject on my own talking right now to say graphic novels are 100% absolutely real books. I will stand on this hill and wave this flag forever. Graphic novels are real books.
Until I started working here, I thought graphic novels meant it was going to be like sexually graphic. I did not understand what graphic novels were, and I thought, oh my gosh, why do we have this whole section? And I was so dumb. But I have learned now what graphic novels are, and they are, what would you say, like comic books 2.0? They're like buffed up comic books, kind of?
Yeah, so they kind of bridge comic books and novels. You get a whole story, but it's more visual and less text in that, but the artwork is amazing. There are book awards for graphic novels every year for various categories. They're amazing and rising in popularity for sure. And along the vein of graphic novels, we also have manga, which the easiest way to explain that is that they're Japanese graphic novels. They're typically read from left to right. No, right to left. I just inverted those. They're read backwards from what we traditionally think of as a book, but they often tie into anime, and they're actually even expanding beyond that into all kinds of other stories as well. And we just started our manga collection. It might be 2 years old by now. It's not too big, but I'm proud of that little manga collection.
I do have a question about manga.
Mhm.
Now, I know you start at what traditionally would be the back of the book is actually the front of the book.
Mhm.
But when you read it, you still read it as left to right. You do not read it right to left. The print is still the same. You're just going to turn the pages in a different direction, correct?
Kind of.
Okay.
So on the page, if it is a traditional Japanese style manga, the panels that you follow are going to be followed right to left, top to bottom, instead of left to right like in a graphic novel. And you are turning your pages. Yeah, I'm going to be so backwards on my directions right now, but I guess turning your pages like backwards from a traditional book. But the text, I mean, the words are still in the order that we usually read them in. So it's not like you're reading sentences backwards.
That's what I wanted clarification on because I think that would be so confusing for my old brain, anyhow. It'd be hard enough as a person that works in circulation when we check those books in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, where is this? Where's the UPC for this? And of course, it's on, quote, the front, but no, it's actually on the back of the book. But the back of the book is the front of the book, which is the back of the book. And it gets very confusing for someone like me. But kids really enjoy it. And manga can be for old people too.
People of all ages enjoy and collect manga. I hope that you followed that front to back to front, whatever Jenny just said. That was amazing.
Or if you didn't follow it, come check out the manga section, and it will be a lot easier to understand if you actually pick up one of the books and see how it works.
Definitely.
It's not an easy thing to describe, but it's not hard to figure out once you have it in your hands.
And just like fiction, manga spans all kinds of different genres. There's one popular series is One Piece, which is all pirate related. And then they actually, a lot of newer not graphic novels, but novelizations will become graphic novels and sometimes become manga. So there are stories that maybe if you read in novel form or that you're familiar with that you can find in graphic novel or manga form too. I actually just handed one young girl today A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, which you wouldn't think of as a graphic novel, but there's a graphic novel version of it.
And we have a graphic novel version of A Midsummer's Night Dream, William Shakespeare. And obviously you would not think William Shakespeare is a graphic novel.
So that is part of the Manga Classic series, which is absolutely one of my favorite series. They have done, I actually read Dumas. What's Alexander Dumas' one?
Three Musketeers, the Count of Monte Cristo.
Yes, the Count of Monte Cristo. I learned things about that story I did not know because I have not taken up the mantle of trying to read the actual book. But there were like details and characters that I didn't even know about from the original story till I read the classic. To go back to, or to reference the adaptations that we've talked about, there's a Pride and Prejudice version. And the way that they draw Mrs. Bennet when she goes on her like tirades, just the interpretation of it just adds to the story. It's so great.
I think especially if you're a very visual learner and a very visual person, this would definitely be a great genre for you to explore.
For sure. Graphic novels and manga, 100%. I will recommend them to everybody. Do you have any young adult fiction or nonfiction that you've read and enjoyed? I'd like to hear about those, Jenny.
Well, we don't have enough time to talk about all the YA I have read because I've read a lot. I haven't read a whole lot of nonfiction. I have read a lot of fiction, obviously. I think one of my favorite authors, one of the favorite YA trilogies I read was called The Testing. It's by Joël Charbonneau. And I read it probably 6 years ago. And I actually read it twice, the whole series 2 times. I usually don't read series more than once because there's a bajillion books I want to read. And so I don't usually revisit books because I just don't have the time. I really enjoyed this one. And it's a little bit like Hunger Games. And so I think it would be very... If you liked Hunger Games, I think people would really enjoy this series, and I highly recommend it. And then one of the original, I would almost call her OG of YA, would be S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders. That came out in the 80s. I came out in the 70s. So I read that book in the 80s. And of course, actually, I didn't even read it in the 80s. That's a lie. I watched the movie in the 80s all the time. It had like all these dreamy guys that I had posters hanging up on my bedroom wall. But that's beside the point. I actually read the book just a couple years ago, and I loved it. And it was one of the best adaptations, which I may have mentioned in another podcast, that verbatim used a lot of the words, quotes, and it was so fantastic. And then another one I'll just really quickly mention is Neil Shusterman's The Unwind series. It takes place in Ohio. Neil Shusterman is not a native Ohioan. I thought maybe he was, because he actually mentions like Akron and Columbus and different places. The Unwind series, it could be considered a little disturbing, but it's so good. And I just basically devoured that whole series rather quickly.
So is that one just sci-fi or is it dystopian?
I would say both in a lot of ways.
Okay.
Basically, in this, abortion has been outlawed, and that's not allowed, but you have your child until they're like 13 years old, and then basically your child gets sold off for body parts, and that's what The Unwinding is about. And so it is about children fighting the system so they don't get dismembered. So that was it's a little dark maybe, but it was really good.
Okay, I am a fan of the dystopian genre. The Hunger Games is absolutely one of my favorite series. That sounds wild. Okay, wow. I've seen that book, so that's not one that I've read. Unwind. And there's a few in that series.
I think at least 3 or 4. It's been a long time since I've read those as well, but I did read the whole series, enjoyed it a lot. It might only be 3. It might just be a trilogy, but I feel like there might have been more. And then you were talking about the Hunger Games. What about, did you read Divergent?
So I did read the first Divergent book called Divergent. I enjoyed that book. As a very big fan of the Hunger Games trilogy, the whole time that I'm reading it, I'm comparing everything in my brain. So when I went on to read the rest of the books in that series, I think I got like partway through the second book and it was just dragging for me and I couldn't do it. Props to Veronica Roth, and she's gone on to write a lot more since Divergent, since she started with that series, but I couldn't get past the first one again because I just adored the Hunger Games so much. I got so wrapped up in that world, and I'm sure you've had this before, a book that makes you cry. And just like closing a book and sitting there and there are like tears running down your face. That was how the Hunger Games was for me. It was very emotional for me.
I read the Hunger Games as an adult. Actually, almost all of these books that I am mentioning, I read as an adult. I did not read these when I was a child. I loved the Hunger Games as well. It was groundbreaking, I would say, in what Suzanne Collins did with that. And it was so well done. I have watched the movies. And so when I watch movies after I've read the book, I have to separate them in my mind as this movie is different. It is separate from what the book was because it will always fall short in this situation. The movies were good. The books are excellent. If you even enjoyed the movie remotely, and you haven't read the books, do it now.
So a book to movie where the movie fell flat for me with YA was The Maze Runner by James Dashner. I read the books and I really actually enjoyed those. Again, because I'm such a big fan of the Hunger Games, I was like, okay, here's another teen dystopian. Let's see what happens. But The Maze Runner is very different from the Hunger Games. And so I read the books and I really did enjoy those. And Dashner wrote so well for those. When I went to watch the movies, I couldn't handle the second movie because there was a character who died at the end of the first book. Therefore was not in any of the other books. And when I was watching the movie, the second movie, I just like I had to shut it off after like 10 minutes. I was like, "You're dead. How are you here? This didn't happen." It was there was not a separation for me. So, definitely separating those two things and enjoying them as different stories maybe.
Now, have you read The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer?
I haven't. I've heard a lot about them, and that's sort of a retelling as well, isn't it?
It is, of fairy tales. The very first book is called Cinder, and it has been a long time since I've read those as well, but Cinder is a cyborg.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also, I think, in the series, Scarlet is one. And so those are really, that's a really good series as well. We've talked about dystopian, and have you read Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass series? This would be a fantasy series for
So,
sure.
that is one that's on my list. I am a big fan of fantasy. I've talked about my love of Lord of the Rings, and everything about that I've heard and read about it is a real draw, but I have not read the Throne of Glass series. See, I'm sitting here and you're mentioning all these books, and I'm like, I'm the teen services specialist. No, I haven't read that YA book. Oh no, I haven't read that one either. I promise you, I've read YA books, just not the ones Jenny's mentioning.
Well, let me get to this one. I'll bet you have heard of John Green.
Yes.
Okay. You had to have read a John Green. He's kind of a standard, I think, for YA novelist.
I have read
What
John
have you
Green.
read by John Green?
I read Looking for Alaska.
What did you think of it?
I thought it was interesting. So, of course, it's written from a teen boy's point of view, which I've never been a teen boy. So there was a little bit of a stretch of the imagination for me to relate to that. I think that John Green does a good job of kind of getting into that teenager mindset when writing. So it really does feel like a teen could relate to it well, or that you, having been a teenager at some point in your life, could relate to these experiences the way that he writes. And he does write very like contemporary, realistic. It's not like fantasy or sci-fi. It's this could be happening right now.
I agree. Have you read The Fault in Our Stars, or have you seen the movie?
I have not.
I feel like that one is probably not in your wheelhouse. It's more of a love story and a tearjerker. Kind of, you read it and you just kind of want to throw the book across the room and stomp on your own heart after reading it. That was what that was for
Did
me.
the book not stomp on your heart enough?
It did. I'm still in recovery, and I probably read it 7 years ago.
I don't read a lot of romance. If there's romance in my story, I also need there to be like swords and dragons, you know?
I understand that. And I usually am not a big romance reader either, but I did like that one. I think another, when we're talking about real life situations, Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give.
Amazing. Just amazing. Angie Thomas, the way that she writes, again, so relatable, so real, and relevant.
Have you seen that movie also?
I can't bring myself to watch the movie, to be honest.
Yes. I watched it. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show Riverdale, which is based very loosely on the Archie comics, but real dark. So the guy that plays Archie was in The Hate You Give, and I had a really hard time separating those two because it was so weird. But I liked the movie, but the book also tore my heart out too. It was so good. And then there's one other person I think that we need to mention who is YA, because I just asked you about him yesterday. I'm like, absolutely, Marcus Zusak, Zusack, Z-U-S-A-C-K. You pronounce it how you want. Wrote The Book Thief. I don't know if you read that or not. Takes place during World War II, and it's written from the perspective of death, and it's so utterly shattering, but so good. And then he also wrote a book called The Bridge of Clay, which is about a family, and it's very good too. He's one. It's not romance. There may be some romance in a book that he writes, but that's not the focus. But the focus is to try and, rip your heart out, and that he does it very well.
I actually wanted to confirm when you did ask me, is Marcus Zusak a YA author? And I had to look it up because I was like, I think so. I have his books in the teen section, you know. What I actually found was this great interview that he did where he said, and I just thought this was fantastic, he said, I just try to write somebody's favorite book. He doesn't aim for a genre. Some authors very specifically are like, I want to write about the teen experience, or I have this story and I think that this perspective from a 14-year-old is ideal. But for him, he's just writing a book to share this story that he has. And so The Book Thief, though it was marketed and labeled as young adult, Bridge of Clay is actually general fiction, which is more adult, or would be shelved, you know, with adult books. He's one of those authors who kind of just spans ages, and you know, just because the story is the main character is a teenager doesn't mean like an adult can't relate to it.
And I think that's why it goes back to YA being for everybody, not just the age 13 to 18. It's for everyone.
Definitely. And so one of the age groups that I feel like kind of gets mixed in or missed gets missed in a lot of places is tweens. We have, you know, there's always a lot of focus on like children's programs, and then we talk about things for teenagers, and most people think high schoolers. But these tweens are kind of your like middle school age kids. And junior hires, I have heard some of the most profound things I've ever heard in my life come out of a junior hire's mouth. It's almost like the least expected place. They're kids that are I have a passion for them. I feel like I could talk about middle schoolers forever, but they're kids that like they're too old for people to be like your kids, but they're not quite like teens or older teens who are transitioning to really being young adult. So our young adult section collection here at Orville Public Library, we do actually have a lot of books that are aimed just for that age, for 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, right in the middle there. One of my projects that I'm working on right now is getting little stickers that say tween on some of those books to help those kids as they're aging out of the children's department, children's section, into the teen section. And, you know, what can I read? And having their parents also be comfortable with what can my kid read in this section. So a lot of times I feel like YA books kind of get a bad rap for, you know, it's got, quote, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you know. And having something for everyone. And every YA book isn't going to have the parents were murdered and now this kid has to save the world. Sometimes the stories are just about their family vacation or, you know, my first day of middle school. So there's just such a variety, and just I feel like everything you could want in a book you can find in a book in the YA section.
Can you name some of the authors or titles from our tween section that will be available?
Absolutely. We have, so James Patterson has a middle school series specifically. I actually just found one that I had somehow missed in my first look over by the author's last name is Pancholi, and the book is called The Best at It. It's about a boy who's in middle school and he's trying to be the best at everything.
Would Diary of a Wimpy Kid fall into that category?
For sure, yeah. Not all the books are like the brightly colored covers as well. So there are some that are going to be about like that middle school experience. But there's also the Fable Haven series by Brandon Moe, which is a brother and sister, and they like discover this magic world. Sounds kind of Chronicles of Narnia, but it's different. If you like Chronicles of Narnia, I'm sure you would like Fable Haven. If I had my computer, would just be able to read you 500 titles right now. But even we have this collection that we call the Mix Collection, and it's just various stories by various authors that are about middle school age, tween age girls doing all kinds of different things. They're traveling, they're baking, they're hanging out with their friends. Along those lines, Lauren Miracle, she's written a series called 11, 12, 13, and 13 Plus, I think is what that one is called. And it's just about a group of friends as they grow up together. So,
kind of like Taylor Swift, didn't she write songs about whatever age she was.
I
at
think
different
she
times.
wrote one about being 22.
Maybe, or maybe it was Adele. Adele had an album, I guess, that was 21 and 25. So it's really nothing like Adele at all. So just made me think of that. Never mind. We'll move on.
Oh my gosh.
So, what are some of the great programs you have coming up for our tweens and or teen age groups?
Well, we have lots of fun things. I like to have fun. I hope I like to have fun with teens when they come to the library. So we do a tie-dye program every summer. And my favorite thing about that is that all that you need to do is bring yourself. We have all of the supplies, and I'll even show you how to make a cool swirly tie-dye t-shirt. So we do tie-dye. With programs having to change in the past couple of years because of the pandemic, we've switched over some craft programs to take and make kits. We used to do make and takes where you would make it here and take it home. But with this, you would take the kit home and do the craft there. And we've done, or whatever activity, we've done lots of things. I did a Dungeons and Dragons take and make kit or a take and play. And that was fun to try to condense down the whole concept of Dungeons and Dragons into a little 8-page manual, which was difficult and it was very basic. But the idea is just to get you started with a fun activity. Building things with straw bee kits, which are just straws and these little plastic connector pieces, if you think of connects. One of the very popular things that I started doing late 2021, was these teen book boxes. And this is great if families can't make it into the libraries, but their teens still want to read. Then they just will register and they'll just tell me what they like to read, what they don't like to read. And then I put a box together that has 2 books in it based on their likes and dislikes and some candy, because we all like some candy. They get to take those books and read them at home or read them at their leisure and have a couple little treats with them. We also do partner with Turning Point Coalition, which is a local organization that has kind of deep roots in this community. We've been partnering with them for a while, and they just offer alternative activities for kids instead of going out and getting in trouble. Tweens and teenagers can, come to some of the programs and activities that they offer. So partnering with them in the spring, we do pizza and books. So middle schoolers can come and they can get a slice of pizza and they can pick out a free book to take home. And in the fall, we have a tailgate program that we do where families can come and do some activities and get some pizza. And then Orville students get a ticket to the football game that night. So we've done those programs with Turning Point Coalition for several years now. And it's definitely a highlight to get to interact with them.
So does the tailgate program fall on homecoming weekend or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. It's always on a home game, so that they can come to the library, get, a hot dog and have, some fun activities, get their ticket, and then go to the game.
I know that the teen book boxes are super cool. I've seen you putting those together, and I've seen the kids get very excited about getting that. And so my question is, when are you going to start that for the adults? Because I think that would be a lot of fun.
I think that adults would really enjoy a book box like that. And that's an idea that we've mulled over in the adult services department. But I cannot give you a date or time when that will start.
I'll just keep asking and just keep knocking on your door until that happens.
You round up a crew to keep bugging us about it, and it'll happen.
Well, I think that we've covered a lot of authors and a lot of books, and hopefully given some people at home some ideas and realizing that YA, you don't have to carry it out of the library in a paper bag. We would be happy for you to just come in, look it over, and ask. If you see Dawn, ask her. If you see me, Jenny, at Cirque, I'd be happy to tell you again about the books that we talked about and give you some ideas. And there's nothing wrong with an adult going over there and picking out a YA book. Or if you're not sure where to find it, stop in at Reference and they'll be able to point you in the right direction as well.
I would 100% be glad to show anybody around the YA section. I've put a lot of my time and effort and heart and soul into the collection, and just making sure that we have this space that's dedicated for teens, for that kind of middle weird awkward stage of life, just a place to be, because the library is for everybody and we want to have a place for everybody here.
Absolutely. Okay, Dawn, what do we have coming up in February?
On Monday the 6th, Cookbook Club is meeting, and they are cooking out of the Modern Comfort Foods cookbook by Ina Garten.
And we have those cookbooks available at the circulation desk if you want to participate. Also, February 9th, Thursday, is Book Club. The book they are going to be discussing is The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave. They will meet at 10:30 that morning and then at 6:30 that evening.
And then we have Coffee and Crafts again, and they're meeting on Valentine's Day, February 14th.
Well, that'll be fun. Story time continues through February 17th, and then shortly after that, they will have a little break, and then they'll have sign-ups for their spring story times.
We have a couple of teen things happening in February. I try to, keep on that, something for everybody. So if you signed up for a book box in January, teens can pick those up in February on the 6th through the 11th. And then we also have a teen craft cafe, which is on February 17th at, it's either 3 or 3:30. I should know. I planned it. But the whole thing with that is just a bunch of craft supplies and some snacks, and then we get to create together, which I think or hope will be really fun.
And coming up in March, we are going to have our second annual Local Author Fest. If you have been following us, you know that we interviewed our artists back in October. So we're very excited to be interviewing our authors again in March. And it's March 11th from 11 to 2 here at the library. And then you can listen and follow along the next couple months, and we'll have the author interviews available.
We are really excited to have local authors back here again. So far, we've got some new folks and some returning authors from last year. So if you didn't get to come.
Yes, and most of them will have their books available. So, decide if you want to come and find your genre and pick up a new book for your shelf at home. Well, I think it's time to wrap this up. I really appreciate everybody that has been listening to our podcast. And also, we would welcome any suggestions that anybody has and any critiques. Just try to be a little kind. We might bruise easily, but we really appreciate everything. We appreciate the support that we're getting from the staff here for sure, and in the community. But we just want to say thanks for listening to Beyond the Shelf with OPL. I'm Jenny.
And I'm Dawn. We'll see you at the library soon.